Hello, I'm Ronit Novak, and this is The Grain. So, I want to start this episode by admitting something that I don't often say out loud, and people are usually surprised when I do. I find it really hard to be vulnerable in public, to admit to challenges, to sit in the unknown, because I am a doer. When I see something that makes me uncomfortable, I try to fix it for myself and for others. So, take the grain, for example. I saw that creative industries, including my own, are in existential crisis. And that bothered me. So, I made a media platform. That was the easy part. The hard part, though, is showing up every day on this podcast, on Instagram, on TikTok, on Substack, and admitting to all of you that AI baffles me, that I'm still figuring it out, and I'm doing it all publicly in real time. And somewhere along the way, that vulnerability became part of the brand because AI makes all of us vulnerable. And I've come to believe that one of the most important things that we can do right now is show up thoughtfully, open minded, and a little unsure. Listen, I still hesitate most of the times. I overthink when I post, I re record. But the most fulfilling content that I have ever made, the stuff that really connects, it always comes from a place of authenticity in me. And it's not because it racks up views, it does, but because it satisfies me. It expresses something that I really just needed to get out. And then, sure enough, it's that content that always lands the hardest with other people too. So when I saw Lee Towndrow's LinkedIn post, a LinkedIn post of all places, where he just came out and said, "I'm scared," it stopped me in my tracks. Because I know Lee, he's a successful VFX artist. He's a creative futurist. He's a creative director, a photographer, a painter based in New York. And I wondered to myself, wow, he's really being bold. He must not have anything to lose. But maybe he has a lot to lose, though, and he's doing it anyway. He wasn't promoting anything. He wasn't offering a hot take or a course or how to AI proof your career. He was just being honest. He admitted to being afraid of AI, of change, of losing something familiar. And he offered a strategy not to conquer the fear, but to sit with it, to stay present, to keep going. And I thought, okay, that is the bar. That is the kind of honesty that we all need right now. That is the kind of thought leadership that we should be looking towards. Because let's be real, so much of the conversation around AI feels like performance. People pretending that they've got it all figured out, right? Creatives pretending that they're not anxious. Folks who are just launching these things and then quietly panicking behind the scenes. But Lee did not pretend. He did the cringe, and it resonated. So I wanted to talk with him more about it, and I invited him here with me on The Grain. But before we get to that conversation, here's Lee reading his post in his own voice.
Fear. I think many of us are afraid to admit we're scared. So let me say it. Of course I'm scared. We're potentially watching our livelihoods crumble before us and turn into something unrecognizable. Some are excited about this prospect and some are terrified, and most are a mix of the two, all of which further divides us. I thought I'd write something that may help. It's It's about a technique to manage fear. I was sitting this morning next to my kid and I found myself lost in thought. What if this or that gets automated? What if my business idea doesn't work out? What if millions of people lose their jobs? What if? What if? I've been in this place so many times. Fear keeps you rooted in an unimagined future, and regret keeps you rooted in an unchangeable past. Neither of them are helpful for keeping you in the moment where your life is actually happening. I'm not the first person to have noticed this. The problem I always had with living in the now is that we do still need to plan for tomorrow, and that's where a lot of us get stuck. We spend so much time trying to ensure good future outcomes that we rob ourselves of living our lives. So I use a two-step process: get here and future diary. So it goes like this. First, I name the fear out loud in my mind. I say, there it is. I'm scared right now, living in the future. I stop myself in my tracks and say, what are 4 things that are great about this very moment? This pulls me back into the present and I immediately feel better. In the case of this morning, it was that my kid was happily reading beside me, the temperature was good, I had a bit of pleasant soreness from having worked out the day before, and we were excited to go to Coney Island that day. That's get here. Often that's enough, especially if I know that in the near future I'm going to be working on something that is designed to increase the odds of a good outcome. But if not, I have a backup tool called Future Diary. I open up my diary and very quickly write a diary entry that's, well, it could be anything: a year in the future, 5 years into the future, or 2 weeks. In there, I write a brief summary of how everything worked out, all the good stuff in my life at that moment. It's not manifesting because I don't care if it actually happens that way, but it is training my brain to imagine positive future outcomes rather than negative ones. Then I come back to the present.
Yeah. So that's what we're doing here. We're trying to make sense of the future without losing ourselves in it. We're trying to stay present. We're trying to be brave. We're trying to be authentic in a world hurtling towards the artificial. Please enjoy my conversation with Lee Towndrow on The Grain. Was it at Dose that we worked together?
And there was some others, Canadian business perhaps.
We photographed Justin Trudeau together.
That's right, yeah.
Let's not forget. And the chess champion of the world.
Magnus Carlsen.
That's right. Yeah, you did a really cool, you were like, I think I want to shoot him upside down. All right, see how that goes. And he did great. It looks
Great,
beautiful.
he actually agreed to it.
That's good.
Yeah.
But yeah, you came to mind again because I was perusing LinkedIn as one does, and I saw that you put up a post that was really striking to me. And I hadn't actually been following like everything that you've been doing in New York since becoming a photographer in Toronto and then bouncing to the States and doing more innovative things. So I'm going to let you speak to that a bit, especially how it relates to AI. But yeah, I saw a LinkedIn post that you wrote that really was a deep reflection on fear and how creatives need to face what's happening in our future in terms of AI and the changes, the disruptive changes that it is bringing to us.
Yeah.
First, let's get into a bit of your backstory. Like, how did you start using AI? When did you start using AI? That's my first question. When was AI a part of your day-to-day work?
It was a part of my day-to-day work probably around 2020, 2021. I wouldn't say my day-to-day work, but it was something that I was starting to use. And it was really more like into 2021, really just using very basic GPT models. I was using the GPT playground and I was following OpenAI and really interested in that. And then I think like everyone, as soon as Midjourney came out in 2022, that really blew things up for me. I have a lot of friends in software development. And so I've been hearing about very basic developments or things that were in play. I remember having a discussion with a friend in 2018 and saying, we are going to see in the next few years, it was a wild prediction at that point. I said, we're going to see in the next few years artificial intelligence that can
can write and can make pictures and this kind of thing. And it
This was
happens a lot.
in what year? In
2018. Yeah.
2018.
So I have a friend that is a writer named Sheila Hetty, who I get together with
Oh, yeah.
every 6 years, and we kind of compare notes. And I remember telling her at the time, like, mark my words, this is going to happen. And she said, no way, it's never going to happen. And it all happened kind of a lot faster than I had thought. And thankfully, I think for Sheila, it doesn't matter. She's just such a brilliant writer and has this very original voice and doesn't ever have to have anything to do with artificial intelligence. She doesn't want to. I know that she's had an experiment that she's been working on, but I digress. You could start to see the beginnings of very rudimentary text completion or text summarization and analysis with GPT 1.0. And obviously when ChatGPT came out in late 2022, that really, I think, made a lot of people pay attention very quickly.
Yeah, something about generative AI really sparked the creator's mindset of like, oh, we can make things with this. It's not just about back-end productivity or getting things done faster. It's, oh, we can make like a whole new product with this.
Yeah, we can make a product. And I think there was something about the simplicity of a chat interface that was very familiar to people.
Yeah.
And so it made the product much more accessible. There was also a big leap in terms of its usability from early versions of GPT to ChatGPT.
So this sounds exciting, fun, novel. Like this is new technology. Let's play around with it. We can make new stuff. Where did the apprehensiveness or like the fear start to settle in?
I think there was definitely anxiety for me for a long time throughout much of 2023. And because I think there was two prongs. There's the generative AI and then there's also the automation. And I've been doing a lot of automation work in my own job, but it was fairly complex and it usually required a software developer and you needed to really be able to understand how to interface different systems. And what happened throughout 2023 was that there was a lot of companies that started building APIs for almost everything. I mean, this had been happening for years, but it exploded in 2023, I felt, because you started to see applications like Make and N8N that were getting very, very good at chaining different operations together and automating things that weren't automated. And then when you couple that with an LLM, then suddenly you could apply some intelligence to some of those things.
Right.
So instead of just saying, pipe this spreadsheet full of contacts into this software, and you could say, take this spreadsheet, figure out who this person is, write an email that's geared to them, put it with an image, stick it in an email, and then send it off and do it triggered by X number of events that might be happening on the web.
Yeah. I'm getting visions of like a Mr. Potato Head where you start putting all of the components together that separately are not very intimidating, but when they're all put together in one cohesive body, it feels like, oh, this is a human-like function. You know, this starts to feel like it could replace us.
Yeah, and I think that is what a lot of white-collar work is. Hammering away in front of a computer, taking things from this place to that place, applying a little bit of intelligence and thinking and understanding of what you're doing, and then piping it into different inputs.
But it wasn't always that way. Like the phenomenon of most of society sitting in front of a computer is what, 40 years old, maybe? Like
not that old. Yeah.
Yeah. Before that, our functions were much more physical. They were obviously not sitting in a computer because they weren't invented yet. We had jobs that couldn't be automated. And now we've locked ourselves into these positions that could be easily replaced, especially if you're not an overarching kind of like director of ideas, but if you are just an implementer of a certain kind of stream of administration.
Yeah, I remember thinking about that around the pandemic when a lot of us started to do remote working and being in front of our computers a lot of the time. There was a joke going around that we're turning ourselves into endpoints. Endpoints in computer software terminology are really the kind of the last point before it interfaces with another system. And the joke is that like a Starbucks barista is really just an endpoint for the coffee machine. They do something that actually takes the coffee and then transfers it to the person who's buying it. But if you can
Right.
automate that endpoint out, then you don't need that person anymore.
Right. You didn't make anything. They didn't produce anything. They were just the
Yeah,
supplier.
they're,
Yeah.
they're really just the kind of like the last point in the system before it jumps
Mhm.
to another incompatible system. And humans are good at doing a lot of different things and thinking about things and interfacing with a lot of different physical and digital products and sources, but that also is starting to not be such a competitive advantage.
So you work in the marketing industry, right?
I wouldn't say marketing. No, I mean,
Okay.
I work in the advertising industry. I've been a visual effects artist for many years, and I do both the creation of advertising and visual effects, and I go on shoots to supervise visual effects productions for films and TV. But then I also consult, working with companies to create workflows for some automation and for using different tools.
So do you think that industry is at the forefront of being targeted by AI innovation, both in a good way and a bad way?
I wouldn't say my industry is any different than any other industry that involves white collar work. I think
Mhm.
that, some of the same forces that are affecting my industry are also affecting really any other situation where you have people in front of a computer.
Yeah. So what is the feeling in your industry? Like, how are people thinking about their future and coping with the potential of being replaced by AI?
So I think that, there's two different pathways. There are people that are really excited about the potential of new tools and things that you can do with these things.
Yeah.
I mean, in many ways, I look at it as being very similar to this wave that went through photography, where at a
Mhm.
certain point you had to be very technical to understand how to use a camera. And in order to get any
Mhm.
kind of results at all, you needed to be able to know a lot about photography. And then
Mhm.
iPhone cameras came out and digital cameras, and suddenly kind of anybody could get a pretty good looking image. And then it
Mhm.
shifted from being more of a craft skill to being more your particular vision. And so I hate to say it, your Instagram following, your social media presence. If you were famous in some ways, then you could trade some of that fame and notoriety for participation in some contracts and that kind
So
of.
that ends up being the product. Like, instead of being a craft person, you start becoming an idea person, and the craft is less relevant because the craft is just so easy. It's just you push a button. And then the product ends up being the connectivity that you have with your audience, the amount of followers that you have, the amount of engagement and likes that you have. The way that these creators operate has changed. It becomes about interactions than creative production.
Yeah, I don't know if the analogy is entirely accurate in this case, because I think that in some ways, a lot of the tools, especially if you get into kind of comfy UI and these types of tools, the tools themselves are a whole different type of craft. Manipulating them to get desirable results out of them is its own set of, craft.
Right. And I think that's a lot of the misconception, is that AI is just as easy as pushing a button on your phone and getting an Instagram image. You're right. That analogy doesn't really track, because I've talked to creatives who say, I spent like my 10,000 hours learning how to prompt properly.
I would, I don't know that anyone's been able to say that they've spent 10,000 hours learning to prompt. I would question that stat.
A
What I'm
long
saying is
time.
that
Like,
certain tools, if you look at Runway or Midjourney, it's very quick
yeah.
to get something. But then
Yeah.
take it to another level. It's the same thing with photography and iPhones and so on. To get something much better and to get something original and to get something unique, that requires its own set of skill.
Yeah, like I get ribbed a lot for being like an AI booster, because what I think is that a lot of creatives might be able to use AI and however much time it takes to perfect their craft using prompt, and they can actually enhance their creative vision using AI, maybe create something new, do something innovative. And that, to a lot of artists, feels like boosterism, and they want to drive the point home that AI is replacing humans, it's soulless, and it's stealing from them. And I feel like those two tracks are accurate, both, and it's like, how do you make sense of that and intertwine and work towards a cohesive future? Or does it become just we have two states of being when it comes to creative production, an AI and a non-AI state?
So I think I have some good news for the people that believe, and rightly so, that generative AI is stealing from the people upon whose images it was trained. That's absolutely
Mhm.
true, and that's accurate. I think we're starting to see movements wherein large companies, I was speaking to somebody recently who said they don't use any generative AI tool unless the company supplying it can indemnify them against any rights violations. So what they're saying essentially is that you have to have your tool trained on 100% copyright cleared
Mhm.
material.
But what companies can say that? Like not Midjourney, not OpenAI, not Google, only from what I've encountered, like Adobe stock
Yeah.
and and Getty has partnered with NVIDIA, but I don't think that has really taken off, to be quite honest. I wish it had because it's such a
Yeah.
great concept. And both Adobe and Getty have pretty good stock, but it's limited. And
It's limited.
obviously, the results are not going to be as good as a Midjourney that's just taking from the entire internet.
Yeah. I think the other issue as well is that, again, we're so early in the development of all of this that we don't really know how it's going to go. I would
Yeah.
say the challenge of proving that there was a rights violation, if you find an image that was created by a generative AI tool, it's been modified so much that it's very difficult to say, unless there's like an embedded watermark or some kind of distinguishing factor, to say
Yeah.
that is violating my image. So we don't know. I will also say that based on what I've seen, movement and the adoption is so fast and so furious
Yeah.
that I don't know that the voices that are saying we shouldn't do this or this is stealing, I don't think they're going to be heard or respected.
Yeah. Do you think it's moving too fast?
I think we have to clarify what the it in that sentence is.
Yeah.
I think that certain aspects of artificial intelligence are moving too fast, but then we're also sort of at a point in history where technology development and advancement is an exponential curve anyway.
Yeah. But when you're saying those voices eventually are not going to be heard, it just means that AI adoption is steamrolling real human concerns. To me, that's too fast. Like
Right.
if it is just bypassing very valid human concerns in this kind of effort to create. What was the point of creating if it means that you have to dishonor all of the other creations that came before it? That's my thought. But
Mhm.
again, like I think that there needs to be advocacy for creatives. And is there some way that that could not happen, that they won't get steamrolled? Is there any way to prevent that from happening in your knowledge?
I don't have an answer to that question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fair. That's okay. There's a lot of unknowns.
There's a lot of unknowns. And I think somebody said to me at one point, you have this dynamic or a flywheel in place in which the people that are resistant to the adoption of generative AI are not going to be a part of the adoption of it
Mhm.
necessarily if they're opposed to it. And the people that are enthusiastic and interested in it will be part of the adoption. And they have a vested interest in its furtherance. And so then that is even more reason for it to be a kind of an unstoppable force.
Just
The other,
because some creatives want to use it. So any government minister implementing policy, like any AI LLM company CEO is just going to see that there are some token or some case study creatives who are fine with it. And there are many that'll just be their validation for continuing.
well, I think there's two separate topics here. If we're talking about government policy and that kind of thing, I can't predict what'll happen there.
Yeah.
I think it's possible that would see it more likely in Canada than the US. The Trump administration, a moratorium on any artificial intelligence legislation for the next 10 years.
There's a moratorium for the next 10 years.
That's in a proposed budget. That's where the US government's head is at. So that's your answer right there.
Whether that's law or just a statement that was made, that's the marching orders for the AI companies to just move along with what they want to do, run with scissors, just get away with as much as they can now before this supposed 10 years is up or something like that.
Yeah, I think the other aspect of it as well is that there is a real sense that the first to kind of reach artificial general intelligence or artificial superintelligence will have such outsized benefits because it'll be a recursively self-improving system that once you reach that point, you've essentially won all future bets because it will be impossible for anyone to catch up at that point. So there is very much, at least in the minds of the Silicon Valley set and much of the US tech community, that we are in an arms race right now with China, which is the other leading power in terms of artificial intelligence. Yeah. And so the incentives to keep going as fast as possible and not have any guardrails are very, very high. And there's an enormous amount of money that's being poured into these initiatives at this moment. And the US has a good chance of kind of winning that arms race because we have much more compute than China has at the moment. There's a really great thought piece called AI 2027 that I encourage you to read.
Sure, we'll put it in the show notes.
So it was written by someone who was a former safety researcher at OpenAI and eventually quit. And he said essentially that you have this kind of race going on, and either the collective powers of the world kind of agree to have a slowdown to make sure that the models we're creating are in alignment. Yeah. Because if not, there's a very good chance that the models will become out of alignment. And then, we have kind of, I'm not going to spoil the something for you, I think.
To me, that makes me think just on general terms, like, so we need to be in alignment with China, like another AI superpower, so that we kind of work together. But that means that we have to shuck all AI guides, all AI compliance governance rules, so that we can be innovative and keep up in this arms race with them.
That's sort of
against our better judgment, right? Like against our better. Yeah. So where does that leave more cautionary creatives? The ones who are not moving at the breakneck speed, the ones who are, okay, they're trying some generative AI. They're not like totally against it, but they're not diving into comfy UI and they're not creating their own agentic bots. Like they're filmmakers, photographers. They're not planning on being programmers. They might experiment with vibe coding, but not for that long. So where does that leave them, you think, by 2027, which is not that long from now, a year and a half?
So one of the things about the future is that it's incredibly hard to predict. And it's very common if you look back and try to look at predictions of what people were saying the world is going to be like in this year, that year, they're very often completely wrong. And so part of what I do mentally with my own practice is to try to remember that, number one, I can't predict the future. And that was really the kind of the impetus for me writing that post, was that to the extent that we are trying to imagine and predict and live in the future, we are robbing ourselves of the ability to actually experience the present, which is where we are actually living, which is where our life is happening.
But we have to kind of build a state for the future now, in a future that we cannot predict.
Yes. And so if you want the kind of the prescription for how to do that, I don't have that. What I can say is that there's a very good chance that we are going to see, in terms of generative AI content, we're going to see an enormous amount hitting us, probably more than we can swallow. And like anything, there's going to be...
You mean AI generated imagery, like slop?
Like slop, exactly. We're going to see a swinging very much in that direction, where everybody will be making all kinds of things. And we saw that with kind of our LinkedIn feeds were clogged with Mid-Journey images for a while. And that's kind of like tapered off. And now it's kind of VO3 and Runway and
Do you think
Yeah.
that necessarily has to come with it a certain sloppy aesthetic? Because a lot of the Shrunk Jesus and the Mid Journey and the stuff we're seeing now kind of all looks the same.
It's true. And I think this is what distinguishes some of the best creators.
Hmm.
There's somebody who's, fellow Canadian by the name of Leilani Todd, who is making brilliant work using generative AI tools. And she uses them in concert with other tools like Houdini or Cinema 4D and does a kind of hybrid, which I think is the best approach.
Hmm.
Also, kind of a music video I saw recently. I think it's Sabrina Carpenter. And there's
Mhm.
obviously some generative AI in there, but it was shot on 16 millimeter film. It's a really fantastic music video. It's got a great story and performances to it, but then it also has these kind of generative elements. So I still think
Yeah.
we see that this kind of stuff, and that's where it's at its best, and it's another tool in the toolbox.
Yeah. Like, why should an artist hand over 100% agency to an AI? Like, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, you actually, as a creative, need to reconnect with your purpose for
Yeah,
being a creator. What was it that you were planning on doing as a creative? And why don't you just keep doing that and use this ever powerful tool to do it if you want to and combine it with the other stuff that you already use?
yeah. Yeah, you use it like you would use a camera. I think that the other thing as well is that by relying too much on generative AI tools, and I'm thinking LLMs, and also
Yeah.
you make your brain soft. Um,
Totally. Well, there was just an MIT study that came out that said you lose your critical thinking skills, you hand it over to ChatGPT.
yeah. The other
Yep.
problem as well is that an LLM by its design is really just going to tell you what you want to hear. I was doing this experiment with my kid the other day, and we were talking about ChatGPT and Claude. And I don't want her to be an active user, but I want her to be sort of aware of what it is, so that when people
Yeah.
talk about it. So I said, the thing is, it just tells you things you want to hear. For example, you could get it to tell you that it is absolutely certain that you are the Jesus of pizza. And she started laughing, and I said, here, watch. And before you knew it, ChatGPT was saying there is a 99.9% chance that you are the Messiah of mozzarella, the Jesus of pizza. And it's because it just picks up on whatever it is that
Right.
you throw at it. And it'll tell you completely contradictory things depending on when and how you ask.
Yeah. It's funny, but terrifying because, if you just hand over agency and you don't take a minute to analyze and doubt and critique its output, you could get swept away in a whole heap of hallucinations or worse, like intentional deceptions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a fear. That's another fear, that a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people have is who runs these AI companies and what are their intentions. And if
Mm-hmm.
we hand over agency to them, there's a lot of inherent bias embedded in AI generated images, right?
Yeah.
And I just spoke with a professor about AI bias. And yes, we can alter what we upload to the internet. We can make sure that it's more representational of who society is and what we look like. But that doesn't stop dials from being turned on the back end to skew bias in this way or that way or tell a narrative that isn't necessarily true.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, that's a whole other level of fear that I find is actually more terrifying than being replaced because I do believe in the creative power of being resourceful and adaptive and experimental. And I do think that we're going to get over the hurdle of copyright and agency, but I worry a lot about the things we can't control.
Mm-hmm. Like what?
I fear bias. I fear companies that are, not Canadian or not American or, like companies that we don't really have an understanding of what their goals are.
Yeah. Yeah. And there again, there were a great many rules broken in the creation of generative AI systems. The image libraries that most of them were trained on were chock full of copyright images. There was very clear disclaimers that they were to be used in academic settings only. And then they turned into
Mhm.
commercial products. And so there wasn't a whole lot of attention paid to bias and representation.
I want to go back to your LinkedIn post
Sure.
because it really is what we're going through now and like how we can think about it and assess it and potentially just deal with it. One of the things you said is first, when you feel this fear, and we already established there's lots of things to fear.
Mhm.
There's lots of personal, there's lots of interpersonal, there's lots of national and international things to fear. First, you have to name the fear. And that's something that I dealt with maybe 2 years ago when I was starting with the grain is there's this fear. People aren't talking about it. People aren't naming it. It's changed a little bit where AI has become much more prominent in people's consciousness and they can start talking about it as a threat. But naming what the exact fear is, what are we afraid of?
Mhm.
You pointing that out to say, first, you have to name the fear out loud, not just that it is fear, but what are you afraid of? So for me, the fear is bias that we cannot control. For other people, the fear is job replacement, like that's a fear for me too, but there's a lot of overlapping fears. So to name it, and I think that's a useful strategy for people listening. Just that first line in your strategy of how to cope with the fear is to just name it, to say it out loud. And then you said, I'm scared right now. Like right now, I'm scared.
Mhm.
And I think, do you feel like people in your circle are naming the fear and stating it now? And has there been like a change in recent months?
I received a lot of feedback after that from different creatives who said that they were experiencing the same thing. And I think one of the things that I saw was that there was a lot of people who were both maybe feeling a certain amount of fear, but also being afraid to even admit it or even admit it
Yeah.
publicly. Uh,
Yeah.
and so I wanted to give license to open that up for people and also to help and have a way to deal with that or to process it.
There's so much out there of people on TikTok and YouTube trying to sell you like a lesson plan or a course or something about AI adoption for creators. And that's also capitalizing on the fear. It's certainly not helping. It
Mhm.
looks like it is, but it's actually petrifying people and making it worse because it makes them think that they're already left behind. And if only they buy this digital course, like they'll be fine. I think that poor
Fear is a great
creatives,
motivator.
yeah. And I think poor creatives are getting whiplash in this
Mhm.
world. Not only is AI coming for them, but all of these kind of false messiahs are coming around trying to save them too. And
Mhm.
they're not saving you like
Mhm.
at all.
Yeah. And I think that's it. If you're in a state of fear, then you can't be creative or you can't be forward thinking and you can't take steps to shift how you react to things because you're
Yeah.
sort of frozen.
I think it goes back to like that inner guide. Like you look at the inner map and say, what is my purpose, value, goals as a creative?
Mhm.
And that should guide you. I know it's scary. And my goals are as a creative are not getting paid what they were 10 years ago. And I hear
Yeah.
that. I hear that. That was happening before AI too. But at least you don't get swept away in some BS like strategy to just squeeze you dry and then throw you out the window kind of thing.
Right.
Like at least you have integrity and know that you're going to use AI in this instance and not in this one. And you can be confident and proud in your creative production and why and when you used it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Or you can decide that you want to do something completely different.
Yeah. You mean open up a vegan cafe?
Is that what you have on your mind?
Heck no, I've never done it. It's crossed my mind, but there's no way I am a dyed in the wool creator. I could never. I would love to. It seems so easy.
Yeah, yeah.
This is what I've always done, and this is what I will always do. It's a
Mhm.
mission.
Yeah.
Um, so one of the strategies you said is to stop yourself in your tracks when you
Mhm.
feel the fear and you name it, right?
I don't really name the specific fear because it might be all kinds
Well,
of things. I just
different ones.
name the feeling in my body and say, "Oh, I'm
Yeah.
experiencing fear right now." Experiencing.
One of the things you said, you're scared right now living in the future. And that is terrifying
Mm.
because you said you cannot predict the future. The future is unknown, is the
Yeah.
one thing we cannot say. We can barely even encapsulate what happened in the past / the present, let alone say what we should prepare for the future. Future in this instance especially is going to be extremely dynamic and unpredictable. So that's a big old fear. And so what you say that your strategy is for that is to name 4 things that are great about this very moment, like right now. That's
Exactly.
mindfulness strategy, that's meditation. Like that doesn't come from nowhere, but it's very helpful here and now. It's very applicable to the collective fear that we're all feeling. So like 4 things that are great about this moment. And you said that it pulls you back to the present and it makes you feel better. So when I see that, I think the things that make me feel great about this moment are I still have the capacity to create. I actually have a very powerful tool to do it if I wanted to, or I can continue using the other tools that are also somewhat powerful.
Yeah.
I still have the will to create. I have a community around me of people who are passionate about creating. I think it's really important for creatives to think about what's really good about here and now.
I would even argue, I think that the list that you shared is great, but you could bring it even more into the present. And there's an exercise that you can do where you look around the room and you name 4 red things, and then you listen and try to pick out 3 things that you can hear. And then you pick 2 things that you can touch, and then 1 thing that you can smell. And it's this grounding exercise that brings you right back into the very moment that you're in. It's not about something that is an abstract idea, that something that might happen like later on this afternoon, or something that's existing, but it's really just in this very second that you're living in. And that's very useful whenever you start getting too much in your head about things.
I think that it's useful also for creatives to think about the tactility of those things, of the sensory perception, things you smell, hear, taste, touch, see.
Yeah.
Because those also translate into visual multimedia world, right?
Yeah.
Those can also translate into creative production. Something of a North Star in terms of what's the alphabet of creativity, right? What is the language that we use to communicate with people? Because even when you start working with an AI, it's like you suddenly forgot the alphabet, like you suddenly forgot your language, how you communicate with people.
Right.
It's still about color, pattern, texture, sound. Like it is still all those things.
Yeah, exactly. And ideas and story.
And our stories might evolve and change too.
Yeah, they might. I'm excited to see instances where people have developed new comedy forms, or there was this great story of a guy who noticed that it was just people's AI recording assistants that were showing up on meetings. So what he's doing now is that he shows up to a meeting about a minute early, and then as soon as he joins the meeting, all the AI transcription services also join the meeting. And so he's staring at a bunch of chatbots, and he said, I'm on the Titanic. A giant iceberg has hit me. I'm sinking. Help. And then everybody joins the meeting, and then he just does everything as per usual. And then when everybody gets the AI summary of the meeting afterwards, it says, Chris is on the Titanic, has been hit by an iceberg, and urgently needs help. Anyway, Q2 revenue updates, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. I mean, I think we can outsmart them sometimes, or at least get like a laugh.
Yeah, exactly.
Or at least get a laugh. But no, I'm thinking the way we interact with the world changes because the rest of the people listening don't know this, but we talked yesterday and you said that the way that we interact with the world now has changed. The way that you output content digitally is now not interacting with the end user, in that we're not Googling and going to your content on your link online, but in fact, it's getting tracked and masticated and then represented by an AI agent, right? In the same way that Google summaries at the top of search results now are just reimagining a culmination of all of those search results that it, dial in bias here, there as it delights. And then we are now interacting with an AI conversation. We're not interacting person to person anymore.
Yeah, I think the sort of implicit contract that we had was that you had the web, and people would make web pages, and Google scrapes your content and serves up ads. But
Yeah.
ultimately, those ads mean that you have visitors going to your pages.
Right.
And on those pages, you can serve up ads and you can have revenue from the advertising.
Mhm.
Or if you make YouTube content and the ads pay for the content. Now, what's happening increasingly is that people are experiencing the web through their LLMs. So
Right.
they're going to ChatGPT or they're going to Claude and they're asking a question. And all of that material is getting conglomerated together and an answer is served up that has no real bearing on the original sources. And the users
Right.
certainly are not clicking on any links to go and visit those pages. So there's a massive drop off in people experiencing the web, and it's certainly hitting publishers very hard, but then also even independent content creators. We're not quite at the point yet where agents are going out and scraping for us. We are a little bit. I mean, you could consider that new versions of Claude and ChatGPT's deep research are in effect agents that are doing iterative processes where they're kind of deciding what to do, going out and searching for something, and then making decisions. They're doing a chain of behaviors based on what your original prompt was. I think that this is something that's not really present yet, but will be present in the very near future, is the marketing directly to agents, or like a, B2A business. And that's going to change both the economics of the web in terms of what people make, and it'll also change how marketing happens. You may see a rise in out-of-home advertising or experiences,
Yeah.
podcasts, where it's like you get the message out in something that people are going specifically to experience that thing, as opposed to experiencing it through a summary.
So creators are just making like the pink slime in the hot dog, and we're not actually the final product that people go to and see, but instead we're actually just trying to appeal to an agent so that we can be a part of the sausage that it's making.
Yeah, in certain cases. And again, I don't think that's entirely happening yet, but there's been a significant drop off in traffic to the web for sure.
So yeah, what's another fear? Thanks for bringing that up. So
Sure. Yeah.
add that to the list. Don't look around for red things. So where does that leave?
Four red things. Four red things.
So where does that leave? What do you think? What do you think creators should do about that? I don't want to be pink slime. Is there any way around that?
Yeah, again, I think it comes down to having an original voice and not just appealing to the lowest common denominator. You have to think differently about how and what is being made, and understand that the paradigm of the web that we have and have had for, let's say, the last 20 years is now being reset and changing, and may look completely different in a few years. And I don't have prescriptions for what to do and how to deal with that. I just merely offer that up as something that I'm seeing that is changing how we experience the internet.
You mentioned in your post a future diary. So I want you to tell me about that. What that exercise is like when we have to imagine being comfortable in an unpredictable future. What does a future diary do for you?
So what a future diary does is it shifts my brain from, it's very easy to get stuck in imagining this could go wrong and that could go wrong, and if that happens, and so on and so forth. And so this is kind of an interrupt where I write down, okay, it's 2027 and this really panned out, and that changed in a way that I thought was really fascinating. The idea is that it's imagining very consciously things working out, and it's very specific things working out. And it's a way of forcing your brain to put neural pathways that are positive down. I don't know how familiar you are with neuroplasticity, but habits are formed by our brains following well-worn pathways. And the more that we go down those pathways, the deeper those pathways get, and the more likely we are to go down those pathways again in the future. So by doing a positive future diary, I'm creating a habit of imagining positive outcomes. And over time, that gets strengthened, and it acts as a bulwark against negative future tripping.
Without saying what that positive future actually looks like, it could be different, right? It could be different from what you wrote down in your future diary. but you have carved deeper neural pathways, stronger neural pathways towards accessing it. So even if some of the details are different, you still have a pretty strong path towards getting there.
Yeah. And I think fear has a way of building on itself, and it freezes and paralyzes us. And so by
Mhm.
building the stronger neural pathways of positivity, we encourage ourselves to think in that way, and thus calm our nervous system, which allows us to make better decisions. It increases the likelihood of those future positive outcomes coming true. The other thing about the future diary is that it's in a space of play and creativity, because it can be anything you want, and you can say, and then this happens, and then the world changes in this way that's amazing, and then I love that I connected with that person, and I didn't think that was going to happen, and then it all worked out in this way.
Yeah.
And in doing so, we can sometimes make connections and form ideas about things that will help us.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I do think that reconnecting with our creative habit, our creative instinct is a good idea, because often with the grain, like, I'm about AI, I'm about learning about it, interacting with it, adapting to it as creatives. But you've just run under this assumption that creatives are pretty strong in their creative vision and how they articulate themselves. But that is also a very delicate
Yeah.
muscle. Like, that is a very difficult thing to create and maintain. And it has to be consistently maintained. You have to for me, I have to look at old masters for inspiration sometimes,
Yeah.
just to kind of remember what like beauty is, that sort of thing, or just the sublime, right? Like, that you can't look at a Rothko on your phone and feel sublime. You kind of have to go out and see and feel the thing. And I think that a lot of creatives have lost that ability, or they just, or not even their own fault. It's just that stuff's not around so much anymore. There's not
Mhm.
as many arts funded institutions. There's
Mhm.
not as many galleries next door where they could go to. It's just not in the common kind of language vernacular anymore, like creativity. And you look at our architecture in Toronto at the least, like, it can be quite sterile. And a lot of what you are inspired by is really just moderated by like an Instagram feed. And that's quite limiting.
Right.
I think learning how to integrate AI into your creative work means also learning how to reconnect with your creative work and output.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
see exercises like the future diary as just one part of that too.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, there are so many exercises that you can do to encourage your creativity. The one that kind of comes to mind is, it's a simple one, but a dream diary is a call and response kind
Mhm.
of thing. If you leave a notebook by your bed and say, I'm going to write down my dreams, you will find that you will dream more
Mhm.
vividly and more frequently and more intensely.
Yeah.
Because what happens is that the subconscious says, okay, I guess we're writing this down. I guess we got to serve up more interesting stuff to write down. And I did an exercise for a couple of months where it got to the point where I had to stop, because I was waking up every morning at 3 a.m. and was creating these kind of pretty vivid charcoal drawings. And they were entirely from dreams. And I love these
Who
drawings,
doesn't?
you know?
Yeah, who doesn't want that? That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's great.
Sorry about the lack of sleep, but I want to see these charcoal drawings.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
I think what I'm learning here with you from this conversation, one of the takeaways for me is, okay, you obviously are not shunning AI. You have fear, admitted fear of it, um, but you use it.
Mhm.
And I don't think you feel overly guilty about using it, or do you?
No, I don't.
No.
I mean, I do and I don't. I
No.
think that
Okay.
it's probably a bit of a devil's bargain, in the sense that, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I certainly understand that it's trained
Yeah.
on kind of, sort of like blood diamonds in a way. Um,
Yeah.
but I'm almost always starting with original photography or something that I've made to begin with, and then I'm kind of
Mhm.
modifying a part of it.
I wasn't going to ask you that question, although it did
Sure.
occur to me like 10 minutes ago if you felt guilty about using AI, but it's not a fair question. It's not a fair question to ask of you. I just kind of deviated
Mhm.
there, but I want to go back to like my takeaway. And thank you. I appreciate you being honest about it. And I
Mhm.
think these are feelings that everybody has.
Yeah.
But what I'm taking away from our conversation is you are a proponent of learning about and adapting with and using AI responsibly, which is good. But what you're also saying is that it does have its drawbacks. You can forfeit some of your creative thinking. You can forfeit some of your creative agency. So the answer to that, to me, isn't let's just stop using AI. It's you need to go ahead and strengthen your creative thinking and your creative agency to offset what AI can be replacing. You need to actually strengthen that to balance it out because there is a chance of losing it. Don't just assume that what you have is all you're going to have and you just need to protect it. You actually should be building and enhancing it and maybe even evolving it in a new way in the face of an AI kind of, let's call it a threat, but an AI functionality.
An experiment that I did recently was there was an image that I wanted to make. And so I don't know if you know this, but I have a pretty active painting practice. And a lot of times I'm working from photographic source material. So there was an image that I wanted to paint. And at first I thought, okay, well, I'm going to put together in Runway the image that I want and I spent a lot of time trying to construct it. And the results were interesting, but utterly unsatisfying. So then I said, okay, scratch that. And I set up a little photo shoot with my partner. And it was not an incredibly complex scene, but within a few minutes, we got to something really beautiful. And then I painted it and it had the soul of the original idea. And I think that's the thing that you have as a creative or as an artist is that your job is to take ephemeral, soulful, almost spiritual energy and encapsulate it into an image or a sculpture or an object or something like that. That's the kind of the thing that you're doing. And you can do that sometimes with generative AI, but oftentimes the much quicker path is to actually just photograph or paint something because there's a very, very clear pathway to doing that.
Do you think that that's something that you would keep isolated from AI and just do painting distinctly as a human craft, human art form?
No, there's been instances where I've generated images or I've needed a reference or something like that, and I've put together something in Comfy UI or Midjourney to get the pose or the angle that I want, and then I paint from that, and it's worked out great. In this particular instance, getting the feeling and the mood and the atmosphere was not something that I was able to get. And it was just, I was able to recognize like, oh, it's not happening. It's not happening in the way that I need. And so I need to abandon this tool and take another approach.
Yeah. I was at a talk last week with Nick Frost of Cohere, one of the co-founders of Cohere, and he was speaking with Jeffrey Hinton. And he said, listen, I have an LLM company. I would not use my LLM to write poetry or song lyrics because he's in a band. He's like, because I'm not trying to write song lyrics more quickly or effectively. I'm trying to create something of my own vision with these song lyrics, and I enjoy writing the song lyrics. And I think that it's not a kind of black or white, like you either are an AI artist or you're not an AI artist, or like a lot of people ask me, what's your stance, and it's like, actually my stance is let's just think about this and talk about it. And creatives are completely entitled to make decisions on the fly and change their minds and do some hybrids or use AI one day and not another day. Like I think that once you start just engaging with it, you actually have the opportunity to make those decisions. But if you completely step away from it, you're out of the conversation. Like you can't make any choices.
Yeah, that's true.
So what's something that you would want to say to some creators who are like feeling the fear? You were prompted to write that LinkedIn post, and I think it was effective for me, and I know other people who were impacted by it as well, just for the sheer honesty, like the brutal honesty of saying, hey, I'm here, I'm also afraid, and these are some strategies to deal with it. But do you have any words of wisdom for our creators who are just afraid to even name the fear are still in hiding from all of this.
Yeah, I think that the words of wisdom are to recognize that struggle is a part of the human existence. And when we fear something, we feel really alive. I also think that it's not something that really helps us to move forward. And so that's why I wrote the post, because I wanted to give people tools for managing it so that they could get back to their sense of the present moment and the lives that they're living and what might be going on at this moment, and equip them with the tools to be able to use all of their creativity and their wherewithal and their ingenuity to chart the path forward. And that path forward is going to look different for absolutely every single person.
You put it on LinkedIn also, which is not where you would expect to find profound, introspective, vulnerable honesty. A lot of LinkedIn is just polished business people trying to brag about stuff. And so for me, that was very moving too. Putting it in an environment that is normally a polished veneer of professionalism and, oh, everything's okay. Look, here's some new AI project I just did. Isn't it great? And I see a lot of that on LinkedIn. And for you as a creative to come out in brutal honesty is as profound as the message. Like the medium is the message. For what you've done too is that you're saying this is how I feel as a creative. Nobody else is talking about it in this way, and certainly not in this LinkedIn context. And I think we need more of that, people to break the ice in not just creative circles, not just the coffee salons or whatever the equivalent is now. The creators are chatting on Instagram or whatever. I don't think there's enough chatting, to be quite honest, in any cafe salon. But we have LinkedIn, and I think what was very powerful about what you did was you really broke through the BS of LinkedIn with this post.
I'm happy that you say that. It was partly intentional, trying to do something. You always try, I think, to do or say something that hasn't already been said 1,000 times, that feels different than what you've experienced. It was an idea that came to me, and I thought, I think I'm going to do this. So,
was there a certain amount of fear or vulnerability or nervousness or anxiety, putting that out, hitting send on LinkedIn?
Not before, but very much so after.
Immediately after?
No,
what did I just do?
A day or two after, I've experienced some kind of what was I thinking?
Why?
I don't know, because we all have friends and professional networks, but I think that our day-to-day can, especially if you're a freelancer, can be fairly isolating in a way, and you can feel like nobody's really listening to whatever I'm saying anyway. So you say something that you think might help a few people or will be original or different or breaking the mold of what is generally said. But then as time goes on and you imagine, what if this person doesn't like that? Or what if it loses me this contract in that way? Then that kind of sets in. But I'm all for trying things and taking risks and experiments and seeing what happens.
Good. I mean, here I've dragged you onto this podcast, so you're doubling down on what you wrote.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. Creatives do need to experiment and take risks and be vulnerable and do the cringe. It did inspire me to put a pretty vulnerable, cringy post on TikTok. Usually I try to be polished and sit in front of this bookshelf and have something profound to say, but sometimes it's we need to just talk about what's really going on in the moment that it's really going on.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you stepping out and being one of the first to do that. There's a lot of people needed not only to read that message, but just to be exposed to that kind of messaging in that format.
Yeah. Yeah. It did.
You did good. You did good. And we
Great.
appreciate it, Lee. And I'm glad we had this chance to talk. See what you did. You've drawn connections already. The neural pathways are stronger.
Yeah.
Because of this.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be on. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. We'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Take care. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, subscribe, share, and leave a comment. It really helps The Grain grow, reaching more creatives across the globe and inviting them to join the conversation. To learn more about The Grain, head to thegrain.ai, and to reach me directly, please send an email to Ronit, that's RONIT, at thegrain.ai. Because we need to start talking about the pleasure and the peril of AI and the future of creativity. And we need to do it now.